Hey there, my name's Rod Yates and you're listening to Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is singer, songwriter, guitarist and founder of Thao and the Get Down, Stay Down, Thao Nguyen. For many years, Thao lived what she calls a divided life. In an attempt to be judged only on her music, as a young performer she played down her ethnicity, often to the detriment of her sense of identity. And though she identifies as queer and was openly out in her personal life, professionally she never really addressed her sexuality for fear of it harming her relationship with her family. For years the shame festered, finally bubbling to the surface on Temple, the latest album by the project she founded in 2003, Thao and the Get Down, Stay Down. It's an album of catharsis in which she addresses her sexuality and her relationship with her family and Vietnamese heritage, while attempting to bridge once and for all the disparate areas of her life. Her journey to this point has been long and not always easy. Thao talks about that in this interview, from her experience growing up in America as the daughter of Vietnamese refugees, to the complexities of cultural assimilation, the role music played in her life, and why for many years she saw touring as a safe space, even if it had an adverse effect on her personal life. But we started the conversation like so many conversations these days, grappling with the intricacies of audio and camera angles when conducting conversations by Zoom.
Now I'm sure everyone you talk to has figured out how to make tripods with different cardboard boxes. I just found one. Yeah, the pedal boxes work really well.
Oh, nice. Now you're like this to me. Like,
oh yeah.
But that's okay. That's okay.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it.
And I read a quote from you when you were talking about Temple, and you said that my life has been really divided, and this was a place where I could finally gather them all up and they would be in one place. What were you referring to? Mm-hmm.
I was referring primarily to being queer and what that was like to grow up in a family, in a culture that didn't necessarily have the language or scope or awareness or bandwidth to grow up that way, and then also throughout my adulthood to try to figure out how to still belong to them and be the good daughter that is so intrinsic in me, but also to be my full self. And I'm also referencing being a touring musician, and becoming a musician also wasn't. No one in their family heralded that decision, and I think that I just have led a life that has been really hard to relate to for a lot of people in my family. So I kind of kept all of that separate, and I live on the West Coast, they live on the East Coast, and I'm always traveling. And I built a life wherein I just existed as several different things, completely independent of each other.
And how did that, I think you've used the word oppressive in the past, that living like that was quite oppressive. How did that manifest?
I think I didn't realize it for a long time, but it's greatest impact and its greatest detriment and destruction was that I had essentially no life. I hadn't built anything. And my job was such that it's so easy to be as transient as you want to be and so rootless and have it romanticized and so that you could very well never change. And but I think that was definitely the most impactful manifestation of it was that I didn't have any life to return to after tour, and that was one of the reasons I took so many tours. And you just feel, you don't know who you are. You just make decisions based on, there are just always a lot of voices at play and a lot of different factors and other people's priorities that you just sort of move to the fore because you don't have you haven't considered your life in a holistic way.
So what happened in your life to get to that point where you confronted this and decided enough was enough?
Love happened. And I also, I've never thought of myself as anyone who would be married or have a home. I just never considered it. I just never thought about my life probably beyond the next 4 hours. And even that tip I picked up from a TV sitcom. I never.
What do you mean?
But once there's
sitcom?
this character. Do you remember the show Murphy Brown?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the guy who's the handyman on that show, and this is years ago. Well, I watched so much TV. It was my only company. And I have always joked that my personality is just a composition of different sitcom characters. But this guy is just a one-off cameo. But in it, he just has this line where he says, I only think of about my life 4 hours ahead. And when I was young, when I heard this, and it just sounded, I don't know, it sounded nice.
It resonated.
Yeah, it sounded useful. I was like, okay, well, no one else is offering me guidance. I will do this. Oh yeah. So when I met my partner Molly, that's when everything just shifted, and it, it was, as people say, you can just you show up in your life,
Was it that immediate?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Because you were openly queer in your personal life. It just wasn't something that you, I guess, promoted through the media. Is that correct?
Right. That is correct. I was, in my day-to-day life, and even in my professional life, it just was something. It was this weird negotiation that I just would never speak about it in the press, and it would never be a part of my official bio. And this was like this, I don't know, it's like this years-long negotiation and concession where, I just knew it would cause my family so much discomfort, and they were just so worried. I mean, there's so much fear and silence and shame, and then everyone just gets wrapped up in it, but no one discusses it, and you just figure out ways to work around it. And that happened for a really long time. Was
that peculiar to your family, do you think, or was that more a cultural reaction?
I think a lot of it is cultural. I don't know. I don't know many people who are deeply religious, or I don't know many conservative Christians or whatever. But when I read about people who have that same experience, and they're white Americans, or but that experience of just coming from people who are of a different time and a different world, and are not concerned with whatever progress is being made in mainstream culture. And I have a cousin who is queer, and her parents have been totally incredible. So I won't say that it's, a wholesale cultural thing, but I will say, of course, in my experience and in a lot of other people's experience, that plays a huge role, and then the idea of being in service of the group and having that group identity, and not necessarily, and it's never, and which I think is really beautiful as well, that you are in service of your family and your ancestral line, and you are reverent and respectful, and and you don't push back, and you sort of honor your elders. All of that stuff, I think, has been beautiful. But the other side of it is, if you are different and want to be, it's going to be really difficult.
I was going to say, it sounds like a lot to have on your shoulders, that responsibility.
That's probably why I left home and went on tour so quickly.
So touring really was, I guess, a little bit of a safe space for you.
It was. It was. And I would, you'll like, in my experience, you can develop muscles and overdevelop some and really underdevelop a lot as well if you devote your life to touring.
You mentioned, I think, again, reading about Temple, and I saw a quote from you where you said to get to the point where you could release the album, you had to be prepared that you may become disenfranchised from your family. Has that happened?
Thankfully it hasn't. And I was it took so long to get there because the thought of it made me so sad to be estranged from them, because I've already experienced so much estrangement in my life. I don't have a relationship with my dad. I made a whole record about that. And just the idea of losing touch with and being disconnected from my mom's side of the family and all of her siblings and aunts and uncles who helped raise me. Yeah, it was really tough. But again, we never talked about anything. So I had when you're shrouded and you're enveloped in that much fear and silence, everyone kind of develops their own narratives and no one's really checking with one another. So I will say that I think getting married and having a home, like an actual home, we were able to buy a house because of my partner's job, not because of mine. But I didn't realize how important that was to my family, that it was the first thing of my life that they understood and could relate to. And I think they say now, which I don't necessarily agree with, but some of them say they just have always wanted me to be stable, to have a home and be secure and have someone to share a life with. And but I think everyone has changed in the past few years. Even if you live outside of mainstream American culture, in mainstream popular culture, you're going to absorb those shifts, if nothing else, just through osmosis. And so I do believe that everybody's minds have opened up more, and no one is. I'll say that we got a gift card, a Whole Foods gift card for getting married, and that is their gesture. And again, it's all about food and security, right? So they're like, you will eat. So that was so sweet, but that's no one's said congratulations or anything like that. It's just sort of this kind of very subtle. There's a different energy of acceptance, but nothing forthright.
Right. And food is always so important. I think I've seen you, and I think you may even sing about it on the record. We will always feed you.
Oh yeah, on Temple for sure. And that line means so much to me because that it encompasses so much of my relationship with my family. Is that no one needs to know the exact details of anyone's life, but you can always come home and they'll feed you, and you don't have to talk.
Yeah, that's nice. And the album, the title track, Temple, I guess amongst other things, in some ways it's an account of your mother's life in Vietnam prior to the war. And I think she worked with the South Vietnamese State Department. And you paint a picture of her in the song, which is very fabulous. It sounds like she had a very fabulous life prior to having to leave Vietnam. Did she talk to you about that much?
She did. And, those were the only, growing up, those, and I'm glad that you use the phrase paint the picture, because I was trying to conjure these images because they were all these images that that had been conjured for me by my mom growing up. She would tell these stories, and she'd never talk about the war, but she'd talk about her life before the war and how many boyfriends she had, and working for the embassy and going dancing. You know, she was stationed in Laos for the 2 or 3 years before the war. And she would travel throughout Southeast Asia, go dancing on the weekends, and had this really vibrant, incredibly joyful life. And that's what I wanted to capture, you know. But I do intermingle those images with images of fleeing for her life, you know, because she did do that. And I only, in the past few years, heard about that story where she had like an hour to pack 2 bags, and she ran for the river where, you know, there was a vessel waiting for her to take her to the next leg of the journey. And so I just wanted to render a more complete and complex narrative of what a refugee of war, what their life is before, you know.
Yeah. And because from what I understand, she met your father in a refugee camp. Did she talk about what the circumstances were like in that camp?
She didn't she said that they were, I think it was fine. You know, when we hear about modern day accounts of what refugee camps are like throughout the world, I don't believe it was like that for them. I think it was a more comfortable existence, and they were there for a few months, but I don't think they worried for their safety.
What do you think it was like for them coming to America and trying to assimilate into American culture, given Vietnam's relationship with America leading up to that point, particularly with the war?
I've tried to investigate. And I have asked my mom questions, both leading and non-leading, and she doesn't really say much. I think I'll answer. So this is sort of an educated guess because I grew up with my mom in Virginia. You know, they first moved. They first came when they first arrived in the U.S. They were in Arkansas, in one of the refugee camps, one of the military barracks, and from there they went to North Carolina and then Virginia. And one of the things that I was so grateful for growing up was that my mom had this shield or this sheen where she didn't absorb, and I don't know, I think it was a nuance of language as well. I don't think she picked up on when people were being terrible to her, or she did and she didn't let it bother her. But either way, I didn't know. I knew it was happening because I could see it, and that's its own sort of devastation. But it never dispirited her, and so I hope that, you know, from what she says that the members of this Catholic Church sponsored a bunch of refugees, and so they were able to leave the camps and start lives. And she said that those church members were really friendly and warm, and that's all she ever says.
And from your experience of seeing her not become dispirited with, you know, perhaps negative reactions to her, is that a trait that you took on?
No, I don't know. That skipped a generation. I have, God, I have the darkness in me. And, no, I think I bear a lot of that for her, and I, maybe overcompensate for that. And I'm so protective of her and of my family. But that is that's an experience unique to growing up the first of your family as the native speaker in a country. You just, there's so much stuff happening that you decide whether or not you will expose them to that.
How old were you when you had to make those sorts of decisions?
Oh, I mean, from probably as young as 9 or 10, when I started to understand more nuances of racism and xenophobia. When I could feel injured by those things, but kind of absorb it because I just knew it was, I could absorb it for them. It's pretty young, yeah.
After the break, Thao talks about being abandoned by her father and how that affected her, the resilience of her mother, and her first foray into the world of music. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Thao Nguyen. Growing up in the US, Thao felt that the pressure to assimilate to American culture was far stronger than the call to celebrate her Vietnamese heritage, and we pick up the conversation talking about the long-term effect that had on her.
There was no other option. I grew up in Virginia, but I'll say I would imagine that was happening everywhere in the United States, that there was no other option besides assimilation. And it's not until very recent that part of Temple, this idea of being able to exist as my whole self, that's also talking about my heritage and me in dialogue and discourse with my cultural heritage in my work. And it affected my career. This is something I've only recently started to address, and it's such a different time now. It's hard to wrap my mind around how quickly things have shifted, and how kind of how backwards and old you feel, even if you first started in 2008, and the concessions and the compromises I made then, and the things I absorbed then, which would never fly, now.
Like what sort of concessions and compromises?
Oh, just totally stupid shit. Just music writers saying that I played Vietnamese bluegrass, which I just don't. I don't know what that is. But if I did play it, I would say I did. I don't play that. And things like, you wrote your record in a foxhole, saying just everything was, everything was so easily predicated upon my ethnicity that my reaction, and this is also from growing up in Virginia, from growing up where it was just better if you were invisible or white. So try to negotiate that how you can. But it's, so my response to that, which is something I grapple with now and I'm trying to correct, is that I just ignored my ethnicity. And I didn't even want to play for Asian people in the crowd because it's so deep. It's so deep rooted. I remember turning down requests to play student-run Asian American organizations at colleges, just anything. I was like, I cannot be associated because they will whittle me down to this. They'll just reduce me. But again, that is such an unfortunate way to deal with things, because all that did was just, I participated in my own erasure.
Which it's incredible. That's a lot to process. That's a really, that's a lot to process for me. I can't imagine what it was like to process for you.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I guess you just grow quite used to it. That I've not known another way, but now I am so inspired by the younger artists coming up, younger women of color, and who just take no shit, and they're so sure, and they believe in themselves so much that I think they'll be able to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that I kind of fell into and then apologized for.
Wow, and you felt that you had to apologize for them.
Yeah, I think that's part of all of that accommodation is when you do stand up for yourself, you apologize for making the person you've confronted uncomfortable, or you say nothing and then you just deal with all of this guilt and all of this self-loathing for not having shown up for yourself or for people who look like you, or levels and levels. I mean,
Yeah.
But I'm really glad for how things have shifted, and I can't tell if it's happened quickly or not, but it's definitely different.
Yeah. And I know that just in terms of your upbringing again, I know that your father left, I think, when you were around 11 or 12. Do you think of your, I guess, your childhood or your upbringing as, well, like, was that a dividing line? Was it pre that moment and post that moment?
I do think, yes, it was definitely a watershed moment. But I think he was such a compromised character, and is still, that there was never safety with him. So it didn't matter necessarily that he was physically with us still. I mean, it was way more stressful, way more turbulent, and way more unsafe when he was around.
Right. And your, I guess, raising you and your brother then fell to your mum. And do I understand, did she buy a laundromat? Is that how she supported you both?
She did. Well, thankfully at that time, one of my mom's sisters and my mom's mom came over. She was able to sponsor them over to the U.S. when I was around 5. So they were living with us, and so they definitely helped raise me, and which is why I'm so close with my mom's siblings. And I was really close to my grandmother. So they were there, but yeah, basically my dad cut out and he just stopped going to his job. And at that point, he was the only one working. And so then my mom was just left in this incredible lurch, and she was able to pool money from relatives, from her siblings, and then borrow. And then she just kind of randomly bought a laundromat. And it was either that or a nail salon. And I was like, oh, you got it. Nail salon, too many chemicals. You can't do that. So she got the laundromat. And then immediately she was running this laundromat. And there was also this dry cleaning portion. And I was in there all the time. And she had a wash, dry, and fold service. And so then immediately we're just washing people's clothes. And that was how... that's how we survived.
Yeah. I mean, there's an incredible resilience there, which, with your mother as a role model, it must have been an incredible thing to see.
It's pretty incredible, but I'll tell you, it was so emotionally intense, but I had nowhere, that's probably why part of the reason I started writing songs and playing music was it's so hard to see your mom work that hard. And you can't do anything. And to see her absorb all of that stress. And so the last thing you want to do is contribute to that in any way. So you take it all in, and then you figure out another way to dispense it and to exercise it.
And that's what songwriting gave you.
Yeah, totally. That, I mean, I just could not, there is no way anyone could physically watch more television than I did. I needed just one other thing to do.
Well, I think I'd seen that you picked up guitar around the age of 12, which I suppose is around the age that your father left. Do you think was that coincidence, or did you find something in guitar that helped heal that part of you?
Guitar was everything. I remember I would fall asleep playing it. I would wake up I would sleep next to my guitar, and I'd wake up and immediately start playing before I went to school. It was everything. Yeah, it was just so nice to stop thinking.
Why guitar?
It just was the only instrument that I had access to. It was an old guitar. my dad didn't play that much, but he had one, and it was left, and it was just the only thing I had access to.
And was it serious from that point on? I mean, it sounds like it was certainly a big part of your life, but was it something that you saw a future in?
I think so. I mean, I imagined a future. I didn't. It wasn't until my first year of college where I decided, or I believed that I could pursue it, or I knew I wanted to try pursuing music and songwriting specifically as a career.
And you mentioned earlier in the interview that that was perhaps not the route that your mother might have considered you going down. And I think I've read quotes from you in the past where you've said that, obedience is quite important in the Asian culture. And you were talking earlier about respecting your elders and their wishes. Mm-hmm. And I presume from what you said that perhaps your mum's wishes weren't that you would pursue music?
I was very lucky because I got, she's pretty progressive, especially along the spectrum of what is possible. And so she says that she believed I could become a musician. But I don't know. I think she was really supportive of me and willing to let me figure it out for a little bit. And I don't know if things had not gone as well as they did, what would have happened. But I think my brother got more of the brunt of become a CPA.
Is he older?
He was older. Yeah, he's almost 8 years older, and he was in school for art and illustration and graphic design and communications, all these things, and then. So unfortunately, he absorbed that for me, and then once when it was my turn, she at that point, just was willing to just let me try.
Okay, and so what was informing your musical tastes? Like, where were you finding music, and what kind of music was it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say one of the highlights of growing up in Virginia is I was. Earlier on, more exposed to old time and Appalachian guitar picking and country blues. So those genres really helped inform my guitar playing, and and how I just really appreciated that intricacy of the finger picking, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to play the guitar. In a really dexterous way, in a really rhythmic way. And then songwriting wise, I was 13 when Lilith Fair happened. And that was, I only recently started talking about it because, again, the stigma, I played into all of the incredibly disparaging, misogynistic stigmas around even citing that as an influence. But I will say, where else are you going to see that many women who are multi-instrumentalists, who write songs, who perform? That's how it's possible. So that in my younger days was very formative. And then I started listening to Lucinda Williams a lot. And when I decided that I wanted to be a songwriter, is because of listening to Lucinda Williams.
And did you go to Lilith Fair?
I went when I was 13.
You went, okay.
Yeah. I went. I got an extra large T-shirt that said Sarah McLachlan on it. It's all that they had left. But it was it was amazing. I was just stuck at my house in my room, and so to get out there and see all these women play music, it was awesome.
Yeah. And so what did you actually study at college?
I was a sociology. I had a major in sociology and a minor in women's studies.
And yet you were still doing music, obviously, on the side?
I was, yeah. I was playing, open mic nights wherever I could find them. I spent all of high school playing local open mic nights, and then I would start to book gigs in coffee shops and, more acoustic venues when I was in college.
And am I right in thinking that one of your, I guess, first breaks came after you emailed Laura Veers asking to support her?
Oh yeah, that to me is definitely the first break. Yeah, I was such a huge fan of Laura Veers, and I emailed her website cold, and her manager at the time was Slim Moon, who started Kill Rock Stars. And I just wrote asking if I could open for her, and Slim wrote back, "She's not touring right now, but I'll keep you in mind." And at that point I had sent this demo of this record that I had made probably my freshman year of college. And from there, so Slim heard that recording, and then he asked me to contribute a song to a Kill Rock Stars compilation, a songwriter compilation. And that was the beginning. I think that's what started everything. Slim became my manager. I signed with Kill Rock Stars. I went on tour after tour, but one of my first tours, Laura Veers took me to Europe, and I was her solo opener.
What was that like?
Oh, it was amazing. And that whole crew, there's such a strong contingent of Northwest musicians and producers who play on each other's records and are just really supportive and tour together. And they were so sweet, and they were so great to me. One of the, Tucker Martine, who produced my first two records, he was on that tour.
Wow.
Yeah, it was remarkable. It was so exciting for me.
After you were on that Kill Rock Stars compilation, there was a brief tour or a brief run of shows with that as well. And I think I've seen you talking a story about being on the side of the road, and a member of your band was cooking eggs on the side of the road.
Yep.
Sounded luxurious.
Oh God. Yeah, it was. I remember we were in St. Louis, and at that point, that was our first tour, first U.S. tour. We were so broke, and he had brought a camping stove, and we bought some eggs at a grocery store or at a corner market, and he was cooking eggs on the sidewalk because that was the cheapest way to eat. And that was when, you'd get paid in beer or drink tickets. There wasn't even food in the deal, And I remember, we were just beside ourselves. We were very downtrodden, and I called Slim, and I remember vividly. He just said, I was like, "Slim, we're on the sidewalk, we're eating eggs," and he just said, "I promise you, it will never be worse than this." That's all he said.
So was sociology looking pretty good at that point?
Yeah, I was like, I should have gone in a nonprofit. That's my whole plan was I wanted to get into domestic violence prevention work. I wanted to be a social worker, work in some kind of community capacity. And yeah, a lot of things were looking better at that point.
And wanting to get into domestic violence work, was that something that came from your upbringing and what you had experienced with your father?
Yeah, definitely. I think it took a long time for me to concertedly make that connection, but yes, yeah, I knew I wanted to. I just felt such a connection to and affinity for and empathy for people going through that, and women and children going through those kind of things.
And did you actually work at a women's shelter for a while you were in college?
I did. Yeah, I was an intern at one. I volunteered at one, but it taught me that that work is so. I have so much respect for people on the front lines of that work, because it's so difficult, and it was too close.
After the break, Thao talks about her advocacy work in women's prisons and the times that really tested her love of her career. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Thao Nguyen. While pursuing a career in music, Thao has also maintained a passion for doing advocacy work, and we pick up the conversation talking about her work with one organisation in particular, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners.
In between records, I would be able to be way more involved, and I was on visiting teams into different county jails and prisons, but I'm still involved with them, and I try to support as much as I can, but I'm not. I'm more on the periphery at this point.
What did you learn from talking to the women when you went into those jails?
Oh, it changed everything. And I have such a place in my heart for this organization, and I grapple with how I can't be more consistent a presence. And that's a different conversation. But what I learned was, and I knew nothing about, I never really considered the criminal justice system in America, and I'd never had reason to interact with it. And I think a majority of us have that privilege. But what you find, so many of the people we saw were survivors of domestic violence who had defended themselves against their abusers. Women who basically were accessories to crimes committed by their partners, but they get charged with the same charge, or in some cases more severe of a sentence. So much of it is it's such a racist system, and people who have money will never see the inside of a prison or a jail, and people who don't will, and there's not much difference between them. And so and the way the sentencing had worked in California with this 3 strikes, you could have 3 felonies, like 3 convictions of counterfeit, fraud, or drug possession, and it could be 35 years, or it could be life with no parole, depending on the case. So it was incredibly everything. I don't know what to say besides it's such an American travesty.
And did the experiences change you?
Yes, they did, because it's really easy if you don't interact. If you don't make it a point to go there, you can say that your art and your music and your social media post, you can say that those things are currency and have traction, but they're just the smallest tokens, of a beginning. And I have so much respect for the organizers, for people who work. And, we sort of have a deeper appreciation now because of Black Lives Matter and all the way things have, the way the momentum has shifted. But all of these organizers have been here for so long, and they'll continue to be, regardless of what kind of cultural cachet we throw their way. And so anyway, it's so humbling, and it makes it made me figure out, made me want to figure out how I'm really going to be a citizen, and I'm really going to be a part of the community, or a democracy, or an attempt at a democracy. And I don't want the easy way out of saying, I wrote this song in tribute to this group. I mean, that's my contribution. But it's hard. It's really hard because you gotta, it takes this devotion that these organizers have. And you can see when people have a calling and they respond to it. It's remarkable.
Is it something you could see yourself pursuing further down the line in years to come, perhaps after music, if there is after music? I think that's part of what is so hard for me, is that I don't believe that, I don't know if that's the work for me, and I think I do love music and writing, and I don't know exactly, it's an ongoing endeavor to figure out how you will truly be of service. But how to pursue things you love, but not give them too much credence, Sure. And so when you think about your career and your albums to date, and everything you've been through, have there been times in particular that have tested your, I guess, love of what you do?
Oh, yes. Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, yes. So much so that I'm not sure. I mean, maybe we've discussed this before, that I didn't know if I would make this next record.
Sure.
I think it's hard to love something so much when it is not, when it can give you as much sorrow as joy, and it's because you care so much, and I don't know how to find that healthy balance where what I make is separate from who I am, and what people say about it and how they will receive it, and whether or not it matters at all, and I don't know if it's this, I don't know if it's like a bad relationship where eventually you're just like, we're going to part ways. We don't even need to suss out who did what and why. It's just not working, Sometimes I think that about music. I think it doesn't matter what's happened, just the way that the way music makes me feel. I don't know, the way trying to make a living in music, the way being a part of the industry makes me feel. I'm not sure how tenable it is, and I don't know why I keep coming back, and if I'm like, well, maybe if I try this,
Have you tried things in the past? Are there coping mechanisms you've tried to adapt and it just hasn't stuck?
Well, I tried drinking all the time. I'm still trying that. Oh, man. I don't know how it is for you, but every morning I'm like, today, not drinking. But life is so weird and hard that by the end of the day, it feels like it's been like 17 days. So I'm like, well, I have to have a drink. Yeah, I think I've tried all manner of, well, the thing with music is it could be such a source of tumult and discord, but you can escape through it in so many ways. You escape just by playing it, and then you reconnect with the things that you love. And obviously before the pandemic, tour is such an escape. You leave your life, and then on tour you leave your life every day because you were in a different city, meeting different people, or you're resetting every 12 hours. So I guess, my short answer is it's an ongoing assessment.
Right. And that was what you just said about touring then. Because touring was so important to you, that you mentioned earlier, that was how you escaped, living 4 hours at a time, or
right.
So there's a lot wrapped up in that.
There is. I would love, plenty of people have such a healthy relationship with touring, and just they've figured it out. They've figured out the balance. Unfortunately, it's so much of it has to do with the financial sustainability of it. So if you're at a place where you can decide, I will only tour for 4 months of the year, and we'll only go mid-spring, whatever, if you can negotiate those things, it's this lovely. It's just such a lovely way to experience the world and meet people you'd never meet. All these things. But I think so many of us are unable to find that balance because it's not feasible. So then, the dangerous parts happen.
Yeah. And part of me had wondered, because I think you were raised Buddhist, and I had sort of wondered whether that had provided any coping mechanisms or any teachings that you were able to apply to this scenario.
Mm-hmm. In my adulthood, I've studied Buddhism more because what I was raised with, which I loved, was more of like a cultural Buddhism and an observation of all of the ritual and ceremony, all of that. But the teachings always took place in Vietnamese, but in this kind of Vietnamese that I couldn't quite understand, because it's not necessarily the conversational vocabulary that I am fluent in. So there was always this barrier between the teachings and me until I decided to pursue them in English, and then I could get a fuller idea. But yes, definitely meditation and repeating different mantras. I do that way more than I used to. The one mantra that I would always hear my grandmother say. I say that a lot.
Okay. And just before we finish up, Thao, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. To whom would you give credit for helping you get where you are today?
Oh, so many people. Good thing it's a database. It's in the cloud, right? So there's a lot of room. I mean, my mom, of course. My brother for, one time on our first tour, we totaled my mom's van, and I called him and I told him, don't tell Mom, but I need the insurance information. And anyway, she found out.
How did that go down?
The thing is, she was so gracious. She was incredible. And I was so afraid to tell her, obviously, because I ruined her car. It was totaled. And all she said was, I'll buy you plane tickets to get to the next city. But of course, she had no money. We ended up just renting another car. But in those are the moments where, she's just been remarkable. I will say, so those are real life people. There are so many real life people to thank, but I wanted to thank people most of whom I've never met, who are different writers that I always look to. I read prose way more than I listen to music when I'm making a record, and so there have been so many writers who have helped me form my songwriting voice and my identity.
Any in particular? You don't have to name them
yes.
all.
Oh, yeah. Grace Paley, George Saunders, James Baldwin, Octavia Butler. And for this most recent record, I was reading a lot of Vietnamese American writers because it had never occurred to me to read about Vietnamese people and our history and our present as well. So Thao Nguyen, who wrote The Sympathizer and a few other books, and then T. Bui, who is a graphic novelist and writer. And those works helped me just tap into this dimension of myself that I felt so overdue in celebrating.
Nice. All right, Thao. Look, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been really great talking to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Thao for her time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, for the rest of the year, Jaxsta Pro is free. So if you make music or work behind the scenes in the music industry, head to jaxsta.com and sign up to become a Jaxsta Pro member. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.